I'm going to be talking about this man tonight, William F. Friedman. And I'm going to talk about his role in breaking Japan's Purple Cipher in World War II. And I'll talk about Friedman from many standpoints. I'll bring in his wife, Elizabeth Smith Friedman, who is also a famous cryptographer in her own right. How many of you have seen the Imitation Games, the films? It looks like about 60% of you. It made Alan Turing famous. Alan Turing was at Bletchley Park, an Englishman, and he cracked the key to the use of the Enigma machine. They had the Enigma machine in their possession, but they didn't know what unlocked it, how to do it. And that film, thanks to Hollywood and Benedict Cumberbatch, boy, that's tough. Thanks to those sources, he became very famous. Well, my goal tonight is to bring William F. Friedman to your attention, born Wolf Friedman. He was the father of cryptology, and personally, and these writings, and through writings, he trained cryptographers and crypt analysts for World War II, World War I, and the Cold War. He broke the Japanese Purple Cipher in 1940, and that had a huge impact on the war in the Pacific. And this is the man that we'll be looking at tonight. And it's a story, as I say, my goal is to bring him up to the level of Alan Turing so we can have these things in perspective. Now, the materials that I used to prepare this, I did my research at the Marshall Library in Lexington, Virginia. And in that library, there is the whole library and office of the Friedmans. It was moved there in the block. And so you can visit that library with the help of the librarian. Right in the Marshall Museum. In addition to that, the NSA, the National Security Agency, declassified a huge amount of material in 2015, and a lot of those related to Friedman, and those have been included in the website now. They're being entered into the website of the Marshall Museum and Library, and also finding their way into the Marshall Library. So I'm using those sources. I have some definitions to get out of the way, and hopefully we won't get very technical tonight. Cryptology is the science of covert messages and secret writing. And it comes from the word crypt. In the cryptography, the practice of creating and using ciphers and codes dates back 4,000 years to the Egyptians, and ergo, the word crypt, the writings that were found in ancient crypts. Crypt analysis is another term, and that means deciphering or breaking ciphers and codes. So this is basically spying. It's learning about how to get into the secret messages that have been encrypted. And briefly, the difference between a cipher and a code. A cipher is a system for disguising the meaning of a message by replacing each of the individual letters in the message with other symbols. It's very flexible in that this depends on the rules of the cipher system, referred to as an algorithm. Now, I won't demonstrate any of these, so it'll take all of our time. But you can change the normal position of the units making up the message. That's called a transposition cipher. You move them around, you scramble the letters. Or you can change the units themselves by substituting other symbols for the letters, or rearranging the alphabet. And for example, the Morse code is a cipher. A very common cipher, no one would use it because everybody has it. So it's not very secret. Now codes place more emphasis on meanings than on characters, tending to replace whole words or phrases according to a list contained in a code book. So if you're speaking in code, the receiver and the sender have the same code book and they have the same set of references. And a good example of this is the Navajo or Hopi language. You've heard of the Navajo code talkers in World War II. There's also, Marcia and I learned on our travels that there were Hopi code talkers too. How many of you have heard of the Hopi code talkers? I think they deserve equal time. There were fewer of them. And by the way, today, August 14th, is National Navajo Code Talkers Day. So let's hear it for the Navajo. It was not broken once. And after the war, the Japanese admitted that they didn't come close to understanding what the Navajo were talking about, or the Hopis. The complexities of transposition ciphers, that's sort of scrambling the letters and moving them around, are endless. The goal is security, not complexity. It's not making the decipherment impossible. Rather, they must be practical and relatively quick to send and receive and resistant to human error. Otherwise, it's a very inefficient, not very practical exercise. And you can make ciphers as complicated and difficult as you wish, but you have to balance it with this problem of practicality. Now, of course, machines came into use back in the 1920s using rotors and switches, and you could encrypt messages and make them extremely complex, so long as the person on the other end that was receiving it had that same algorithm and could share it and unscramble it in the same way. And ciphers are frequently changed to discourage crypt analysis, that is, to discourage spying. So let me get into the life of, I'm going to cover tonight Friedman's Jewish roots, his career, his relationship to his wife and some aspects of her career, and then Friedman's struggles, his triumphs, and his legacy. So let's start with the life of Friedman, born Wolfe, W-O-L-F-E. He was born in Moldova, in what was then part of Russia, in 1891. His family fled because of pogroms in 1891 or 1892, and they came to Pittsburgh. So they are Jewish refugees, he and his parents, Orthodox Jews. He was raised as an Orthodox Jew in Pittsburgh. He went to Pittsburgh Central High School. Does anybody know that location? Looks like we got at least one. Did you go to school?
No, but I know where it is.
And he bonded with 5 other Jewish students at Pittsburgh High School, and they were interested in Pittsburgh Central, and they were interested in the Back to the Soil, the Jewish Back to the Soil movement, which was part of the whole Zionist thrust. He and the other 5 Jewish students went to Michigan Agricultural College, which is now Michigan State. And he spent 2 years there, decided he wasn't too fond of agriculture, and transferred to Cornell, where he became a student of genetics. And you might see a relationship between genetics and encryption. Actually, there's a lot of code solving that goes on in genetics too. In 1915, he was hired by a rather eccentric man, a man who was a textile manufacturer named George Fabian. And he was brought into Fabian's operation in Riverbank Laboratories near Chicago in 1915. And Fabian was a little crazy, to say the least. He would sit in a swing over where the workers were assembled, and he would give them directions from the swing, and point at a little stick. This is not your typical boss. Well, maybe it is. I was at a university. But the big activity, he was hired as a geneticist to deal with plant growth and production and to make better plants. But there was the main activity at the riverbank, at Riverbank, which was basically agricultural and recreational paradise, kind of utopia, was cryptography. There was a unit of 14 cryptographers, and they were studying, they were working on the question of whether Sir Francis Bacon was William Shakespeare. 14 of them. And also at Riverbank was a woman by the name of Elizabeth Wells Gallup, who had hatched the theory that Sir Francis Bacon was Shakespeare. And to prove this, she needed a lot of photographic exhibits of their writings. And so William Friedman was brought in as a cameraman. He had some camera skills. So he would take photographs of the writings of Shakespeare and Bacon, and then the cartographers would do their thing and run through it and try to prove that there was a relationship between the two. Well, Friedman, fortunately for all of us, fell in love with two things: cartography and Elizabeth Smith, who was collating the work of the cartographers, an English major. So he joined the cartographers and worked with them quite a bit. They were eventually married in 1917, and she was a Presbyterian. And as Friedman's son later pointed out, this had the influence, or had the effect in Pittsburgh of a bomb going off. It's not the most popular union in the Pittsburgh Jewish community. But it worked out fine for them and for all of us. Shortly thereafter, the Riverbank and Fabian contracted with the War Department and to work for the British regarding the Indian revolutionists. So they would do crypto-analytical work on intercepted messages that the British had to see what the revolutionaries were up to. And so they deciphered those, and also they had a contract from the War Department to decipher messages from unfriendly countries, those regarded as unfriendly. And he did this, and that he broke into the profession that way. And they were visited by a guy named Joseph Mulgorn, who was a colonel in the Army. And he came out to assess what was going on in Riverbank. And he was so impressed with Friedman, they became very good friends. And the story builds later on in this talk of their relationship. But to make a long story short, or longer, they contracted in order to have Riverbank do this. And as part of the work, Friedman became the trainer. He became the head of the cryptography unit to do the training for most of the cryptographers and crypt analysts that were developed for World War I. And he taught the great bulk of them right there at Riverbank. Then he tried to get to France and join the U.S. Army. He wanted to be part of a very patriotic man. He wanted to help the war effort in France. And Fabian sabotaged him. He would steal the mail that he got from the War Department and not let Friedman see it. And it delayed Friedman's effort to get into the Army. And then Fabian pulled strings through his brother-in-law in Washington to have him classified as 4F. So he didn't do him any favors. Finally, Friedman made the contacts, got taken by the Army, and went to France. And he often said that he could have made a much greater input into the war effort in World War I had not Fabian sabotaged him. In 1919, he comes back. He comes back to Riverbank. Why did he come back to Riverbank? Well, the money was there, the security was there, and he got Fabian to sign on the dotted line with regard to a number of conditions, so he came back. But he escaped in 1920, and he was hired by the Army's chief signal officer. And he went to work as the head cryptologist or cryptographer at the Black Chamber, famous Black Chamber Military Intelligence 8 in Washington. And he wrote a book at that time, or his paper. Let's see, the first paper he wrote was one called Index. He developed several sources, and the index of coincidence and its applications in cryptography. And what he did in that very famous work was tie crypt analysis to mathematical theory. And he gave it a scientific basis. And he totally transformed the field into a subfield of science, of mathematics. So that was an enormous contribution in terms of finding patterns for the crypt analytical work. He laid the basis. And that, by the way, that work, plus others that Friedman wrote, was Alan Turing's education. So whatever Turing and the people that intellectually learned, their mentor, in effect, was William Friedman. He moved into this office in Washington, and he worked on new ciphers and machines throughout the 20s. He broke the teapot dome scandal in 1924. Interesting fact, little known. And meanwhile, his wife Elizabeth was working for the Treasury Department and was breaking criminal gangs, breaking the ciphers and codes used by criminal gangs and rum runners. So she was famous in her own right, developing this reputation of her own. It's very hard work, crypt analysis, and he suffered a lot of strain. And he went into psychoanalysis, William did, in 1929, and recovered from that sufficiently to take over as signal within the new Signal Intelligence Service in 1929. That was established, the Black Chamber was abolished, and Friedman became head of cryptanalysis and cryptology and all of the cryptographic functions of the federal government. There was also a Navy office that was created at the same time, so they split that function. But Friedman was at the heart. And throughout the 1930s, he trained, again, all of the crypt analysts and cryptographers that were gaining employment within government, and they became the core of our force in World War II in that field, including German officers who read his works. So not directly, he didn't know it, but he was training the German military as well in cryptanalysis and cryptography. He hired three men early in 1929 who became very famous also. Frank Rowlett, R-O-W-L-E-T-T, is a very famous man within the cryptographic field. And a couple of Jewish fellows named Kolbach and another guy, which the lost for a moment. And he built that office. There were three of them initially, and he brought in. He insisted on data processors to be brought in 1936, so that was added to the operation. And then the 1938 budget, the Army had 11 people in this function in the secret messaging center, and that they had a budget of 24,000 plus change. 11 people. That was our cryptographic During this period, Japan rose in the cryptographic field, and they developed a new system called a purple cipher. And purple replaced Enigma. The Japanese Navy had gotten Enigma from the Germans in 1934, but purple went well beyond it and used another level of machinery to make it much more difficult to break. Malborn, I mentioned him earlier, the guy that came to Riverbank in 1918 to launch Friedman's career, in effect, he was a two-star general, and he was head of the intelligence part of the War Plans Department, so he was known as the people in this unit affectionately call him the Big Mocker. And they hired some new faces, including a guy by the name of Leo Rosen, who was a mechanical genius. And Malborn ordered Friedman's unit to work on purple to solve the Japanese cipher, because in 1938 it began to appear that Japan would be an enemy of the United States, and that war was a possibility. So Friedman's unit went to work, but Friedman was doing other things at the time and running the whole operation. By the fall of 1939, Malborn calls in Friedman and says, you've got to take charge of this. You've got to do it. You've got to lead this effort. And Friedman drops everything else and goes to work on Japanese cipher, on purple. He works on it for 9 months, and in August of 1940, he cracks it. He gets the solution. He comes home that night. His wife remembers that all he said that day was, hi, what's for dinner? Secrecy was at the root of what they did, and they observed it to the letter. He had a mental breakdown after this grueling 9-month period of work. And he was admitted to Walter Reed Hospital, and he was under intensive care for several months. So he's barely functional by the time he gets out in the first part of the war. Or by Pearl Harbor, he's just partially functioning. Let's talk about crypt analysis and the kind of pressure and anxiety that causes. Here's what David Kahn, who is the leading historian in the field of cryptography, has to say. A crypt analyst, brooding sphinx-like over the cross-ruled paper on his desk, would glimpse the skeleton of a pattern in a few scattered letters. He tried fitting a fragment from another recovery into it. He tested the new values that resulted and found that they produced acceptable plain text. He incorporated his essay into the overall solution and pressed on. Experts in Japanese filled in missing letters. Mathematicians tied in one cycle with another and both to the tables. He had enormous help in this effort from Leo Rosen. Rosen was able to build, using Friedman's calculations, a purple machine that exactly matched Japan's use of sophisticated telephone switches. And this machine was not found until after World War II. And it was the exact copy of this machine that Rosen had fabricated. So that enormously increased the efficiency of the system, of the code-breaking system. The cipher-breaking system, I should say. During this period, Elizabeth was very busy. She went to work as a civilian, and she went to work for Wild Bill Donovan of the OSS, and developed secret communication systems, which are still secret. They're still classified. We all know what she did. She gets short shrift, but if she's played by, what's her name, Knightley, the one in Imitation Game, she'll be very good. So let me give you a snapshot of Friedman. Here it is, by the way. So be sure to take a look at it at some point when you come out later. Friedman in the late 1930s. His son referred to him as a charming old world type. He was average size, average height, build, a very natty dresser, always wore bow ties, and was always looking very sharp. He's tidy, quiet man, introspective. Took copious notes. Every conversation he had, he made notes. Every communication with any foreign agent or person, he would make notes. To go into his office at the Marshall Library and open a book is unbelievable. You can find out what Friedman had for breakfast name and date. He was a collector of many things, including literary works, musical compositions. He was just almost a hoarder. He was a hoarder. He was well-liked and very considerate. He was a wonderful administrator, and there are many references to how he took care of building the organization and making sure his people were well cared for and well motivated. He had a mischievous sense of humor. I'll give you one story about that. He would invite people to his home, and Elizabeth would prepare a progressive dinner. But in order to get the next course, you had to solve a cipher that he gave you. So people would sit around for hours and they'd get very hungry until they could solve the cipher. He had great musical talent. He had 2 pianos in his home. They had 2 children. I mentioned before his extreme patriotism, and he had absolute integrity. Enter another hero, Navy Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort, R-O-C-H-E-F-O-R-T. Rochefort, Navy Lieutenant Commander, assigned to Pearl Harbor in June 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor. He's an expert in crypt analysis, radio, and the Japanese language. It's a tough job description to fill, but he did it. He maintained the system, by the way, of breaking purple, of deciphering it, intercepting the messages, teletyping it, transmitting it, running the deciphering programs, and changing it and translating and changing it into plain text. This whole process was called magic, M-A-G-I-C. Magic was efficient, smooth, and overused. Remember the ethical dilemma in the film that the British government had with too much information. If the Germans began to suspect that they had the code, they could improve the code so it would be much more difficult to crack. Or worse, they would use the code to send false messages in order to lead the military planners into disastrous decisions. And George Marshall was urging, like Churchill did, that overuse would lead Japan to discover and wreck the system or misuse it. So Marshall said of magic, there was too much of it, so he began to constrain the scope of its use to the extent that he could. Fortunately, the Japanese never caught on. Magic tracked all top military and diplomatic Japanese communication throughout the rest of 1940 and into 1941, including that related to pre-war expansion and negotiations with the United States, which were going on. So, you're probably wondering, so why was the attack in Pearl Harbor a surprise? I was wondering the same thing myself. And I'll give you the facts of what happened on December 7th, 1941. At 1:28 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, the Navy listening station near Seattle intercepted a 9-minute message being sent from Tokyo to the Japanese embassy in Washington. Station personnel took that message, punched the message onto a teletype tape, dialed a number and transmitted the message to room 1649 of the Navy Department on Constitution Avenue in D.C. The whole thing took just minutes. And this is the Navy's top secret Crypt Analysis section. That's where the purple machine copy was had. That's where it was, in the Navy office. And a guy by the name of Lieutenant Francis Brotherton recognized it as a top-level purple cipher. And the machine produced the message in Japanese in minutes. The magic was in motion. Here it was about not even 2 a.m. yet in Washington, and that means it's before midnight in Hawaii. Navy translators were not on duty yet. So Brotherton put a priority sticker on the decode message and carried it next door to the SIS, the Army's office, the Army's Special Signal Intelligence Service, at the munitions building, where a translator was on overnight duty. At 7:30 a.m., the Navy translator, Lieutenant Commander Alwyn Kramer, the Navy's top Japanese language expert, arrives. He and others collate all the existing messages relating to the negotiations, makes copies for the President and Secretaries of State, War, and Navy Secretaries and military officers. And this is all the messages they collected over the last week because these negotiations are continuing. And there's a message, or there's a meeting scheduled at 10 o'clock at the State Department, Sunday morning, all about the negotiations. They're going to meet the Japanese at 1 o'clock for a session. So Kramer, Lieutenant Commander Alwyn Kramer, gathers these messages now that are now ready. And at 9:30, he takes off to deliver them, hand deliver them, because you can't trust the phones and so forth. The Japanese may be listening, so you hand deliver. It's about an 8-block walk, and he walks up to the State Department. The munitions building is about 12th or so around that. 12th Constitution, something like that. Kramer is out the door at 9:30 to hand deliver. He returns, and only now reads the message, the key message that was intercepted that morning, and translated, and now it's been dropped off at his office. And he looks at this message and he says to himself, ooh, wow. The message addressed to the Japanese ambassador in Washington tells him to convey to the U.S. Secretary of State at 1 p.m. Washington time. What is that Hawaii time? Subtract 5 hours. Dawn. To deliver at 1 p.m. in Washington time these words in English to the Secretary of State. Quote, the Japanese government regrets to have to notify hereby the American government it cannot but consider it is impossible to reach an agreement through further negotiations. They're going to cut off negotiations on by. Kramer is smart enough to say this may suggest an attack. Where are the messages? There's no messages that mention Pearl Harbor. No messages that talk about the time of an attack. You've got Pearl Harbor, you've got Malaya, you've got the Philippines, you've got Panama, you've got a lot of places that can be hit. It's now 10:15. 1 hour later, Japanese planes will leave their carriers, and in 2 hours they will be over Pearl Harbor. Of course, he didn't know that. So I want you to think about this image. Kramer takes off double time, running from 12th to wherever, at the State Department, running through the streets of an empty Washington on a Sunday morning. The world hanging in the balance. And I want you to just capture that image, if you will, for a minute. The crypt analysts have done their job brilliantly. They got, within a few hours, they decrypted the message, they translated it, they delivered it to all these secretaries of state, war, and Navy, and now it's their job. Well, they teletype urgent messages to all these places, including Honolulu, and it's not their fault that sleepy Hawaii personnel and a poorly integrated military message center in Hawaii conspired to delay delivery in Hawaii to 3 p.m. Hawaii time. And General Short gets the message to Hickam. He says, oh, not to tell me. He throws it in the wastebasket. Well, that was Pearl Harbor. Post-Pearl Harbor developments in the Battle of Midway Island. After Pearl, Rochefort, this really sharp guy that heads the Hawaii office, has a combat intelligence unit, it's called, the CIU. Works closely with the Navy headquarters group in D.C., the British unit in Singapore, and Fabian's got a group in Oregon. Meanwhile, Friedman is getting better, and he visits Bletchley Park and talks with Turing and a lot of these other people, and they sit at his feet and gain knowledge. The CIU has been beefed up by the dissolved band from the USS California. They're no longer playing. There's a war going on. And many of these people are delivered to Rochefort's office as staff. And would you believe it? Most of them turn out to be very good crypt analysts. There must be a relationship between being a musician and the ability to decrypt messages. I thought that was fascinating. And they also have a guy in the office who is adept at using IBM machines to do calculations. So they have a really efficient operation going. The Japanese still do not suspect their system is broken. And as a matter of practical convenience, it dictates the continuous use of purple with some modifications, which are difficult, but Rochefort and the others solve them. And so they stay pretty much on top of the message of magic. So these fragments of Japanese naval decisions keep coming in and are painstakingly put together by the Americans and British and fitted together. And all three of the crypt analytical units conclude that the next major attack will likely come at Midway Island. Well, they let the Navy know, of course, the Navy brass. Chief Naval Officer Ernest King was the Chief Naval Officer at the time. And they are unconvinced by this, what they call theory. So they prepare to send the U.S. fleet to Alaska, to the Aleutian Islands, falling for the feint that Admiral Yamamoto, the great Japanese leader, has prepared for. He's going to send a small part of the fleet for the Aleutians to draw the Americans up there, and then a little later he's going to hit Midway with the bulk of his fleet and his carriers. So that's the plan. Well, what does Rochefort do? He tricks Yamamoto into supplying the clincher evidence. How does he do that? He tells the base at Midway, through a cable communication, to send him an innocuous message in plain text that will easily be intercepted by the Japanese, who would then transmit it in cipher to its various units, which can be geographically determined. So they're going to send it, and if they're sending it from around Midway, they'll know that. And the message, Midway's freshwater distillation system is broken down and requires repairs. That's it. And it works. The Japanese promptly send it by cipher, by purple, all over. The Americans pick it up, and finally the Navy is convinced. Nimitz is finally convinced. Forget about King. I think he remained clueless the whole war. But because of magic, the Navy knows about as much about the Midway operation as many Japanese warship captains. So with great difficulty, the CIU, Rochefort's Crypt Analysis unit, has determined the smaller Aleutian operation will commence June 2nd and Midway attack on June 3rd. That proves out to be almost correct. That was a very difficult thing to ascertain. It took a lot of analysis, but we got the dates pretty well. The battle itself at Midway ensues on June 4th, with the Americans holding the surprise guard, and the rest is glorious history. That would not have been possible had it not been for Friedman, cracking purple, and had not Rochefort used his rhodium. The Navy top command would have sent the whole fleet to Alaska, and it would have delayed victory in the Pacific by quite a while. Many victories followed Midway using purple deciphering. we couldn't let them know too much. We couldn't use it regularly, but the first thing that happened was the Navy is forced to hand over its purple machine to the Army. Administrative victory, number one. Friedman's office, by the way, has now grown from 300, which it numbered on December 7th, 41, to over 10,000 personnel by this time, by just after the Battle of Midway. A huge volume of Japanese resupply tonnage is sunk from then on. The Americans use the information judiciously, but they get a lot of the tonnage and send it to the bottom of the sea. And then, in a very dramatic happening, Yamamoto is assassinated. They intercept the message, they know where Yamamoto is going to review troops, they shoot down the plane, Yamamoto is assassinated, and it's a big morale loss. I'm getting time signals. Okay, after World War II, the NSA is created by Truman. There's a huge explosion in its size. Friedman is made the chief cryptologist with the National Security Agency. He receives a Medal of Merit from Truman, which is very vague. It doesn't say what he's done. His mental health goes to hell. He's back in the hospital. He attempts suicide. He's treated several times for mental problems. And he keeps surmounting them, comes out again. And he strengthens greatly the cryptanalytical function by tying it to his own theory and hiring mathematicians. So this is the place where most math majors in the United States go to get hired. He retires in 1955. That's not too long in the NSA. Why does he retire? He's frail. He objects mightily to the NSA's new policy of spying on allies, which he thinks is deplorable. He detests the fact that the State Department is giving his people lie detector tests. And he also resents, on a style issue, he resents that the craft that he developed, the science that he developed, is turning from a craft into an industry.